This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. Many start creative projects. Regardless of their scale, infinitesimal or gargantuan, only a small percentage of them finish. Starting is hard enough in today's world fraught with pitfalls, time constraints, and other organizational challenges. Yet getting anything original yet quality across the checkered finish line is by far the hardest part. Especially long-term creative projects, which require extensive planning, commitment, will engagement, and massive stretches of pushing the comfort zone to the limits. The hardest projects will be full of the lowest lows and the highest highs, descending into the depths of a Goonie or Indiana Jones cave filled with tarantulas and skeletons, or going to such heights you have to make oxygen decisions while also stepping over the corpses of your fallen comrades. Folks think climbing Mount Everest is hard. Most would never want to, some are interested, fewer try, and even fewer succeed with their lives. A long-term creative project can be just as challenging and trying, perhaps only minus the dangers of freezing to death and having your rotten meat suit entombed in the ice for years to come. It's exceptionally rare to have a job with any sort of creativity. Most jobs are repetitive to the point of being robotic. Many consist of communication, meaning customer or client interactions, or mainly meetings with colleagues, often consisting of meetings about meetings before the next meeting. Others involve calculations and or number crunching. Old paradigm ones require you to get black lung from a coal mine, or new paradigm ones still result in carpal tunnel from too much time at the keyboard while coding. Some are in the arts, which are initially thought to be more creative, yet people in a creative industry may not have a creative job. The gal who wants to create her own beautiful fashion line gets an internship at Vogue in Paris, only to spend the following 3 years bringing coffee to others. If you're in an entertainment industry, things cease to become creative and instead turn very technician and assembly line based. In January of 2020, I sat down for a conversation with Corey Martin-Jewell. Corey has a background working as a post-production technician primarily in the film industry. The extremely unusual thing about him is that he has been trying for over 15 plus years, nearly 2 decades, to make a fully animated feature film mostly by himself, which is basically unheard of, as individuals can spend years just making an animated short film, let alone a feature-length one. And it's not uncommon for a production company or game company to spend $1 million on a 60-second high-end game cinematic. High-end feature animated films take years to complete, with hundreds of millions of dollars, with hundreds if not thousands of creatives, artists, and technicians working on them. Look at the end credits of any movie and know they are usually a massive team effort. Animated films are like that cubed, because theoretically one gal guy with a camera can go off and make stuff, and one gal guy on a computer can do that as well. But everything CG, meaning computer graphics, generally takes significantly longer than anything live action. It is feasible with how cost-effective and democratized technology has become today, with very powerful computers and cost-effective software now accessible by most of those in the first world, on an animated project to break out all the roles so you can do every role yourself, if you have enough talent, commitment, and time, which very few do. Dave Grohl, who was the drummer for the 90s band Nirvana, is a phenomenal musician. Following Kurt Cobain's death in April of 1994, Grohl retreated, unsure of where to go and somewhat what to do. In October of that year, he scheduled studio time and recorded a 15-track demo. With the exception of a single guitar section, Grohl performed all the instruments himself. This used to not be possible in analog, but today is possible in digital because each element is broken out separately in a recording studio. Creating an animated movie is similar, where one can, if they are crazy enough, write the script themselves, storyboard it themselves, perform the motion capture of the action themselves, meaning record a live-action performance on a motion capture stage to then apply to an animated character, then come in and separately lens the camera, then edit rough pre-visualization themselves, etc. On live action, you can't be both the subject and the cameraman at the same time during shooting unless you just lock off a camera on a tripod and record yourself. But that's more like being a vlogger and not so much a filmmaker. This is why, if we could have one superhero power, it would be to duplicate ourselves at least once, if not multiple times. So as a documentary filmmaker, our primary self could be on camera, interviewing, or being in a situation, and another copy could be doing the filming, and another the sound. We could be an entire crew by ourselves. And we could be more of an on-screen documentary filmmaker, such as Michael Moore or Werner Herzog, who are not only narrating but also featured and seen on screen. For to be seen is to be known, and to not be seen is to be out of sight and thus out of mind. We've spoken in the past as to how crazy it is to do any sort of animation or computer graphics independently, because it takes forever. So for Corey, making this choice in his life is something that I deeply grasp the idea of wanting to do, being another former post-production working technician myself, while also greatly respecting the value of him trying to forge his own way and make something of his own. As someone who also spent nearly 4 years making a feature documentary independently, and may spend the rest of our lives trying to make an episodic documentary series, I absolutely feel his pain and greatly identify with his struggle. Another angle on this life choice can be seen in the documentary Indie Game the Movie. The film shows the high level of personal expression that typically goes into independent games, through the story and challenges of 3 small games which were struggling with development hell for several years, as their creators slogged through all aspects of their productions, sacrificing the benefits of a good-paying salary they could get from working at a large game company, yet having no say in the creative aspects of the overarching project, trading that to instead slog through the swamps of every aspect of creating the game on their own in order to maintain creative control. In the documentary, one of the wives of the creators, which is amazing in its own right that they've been able to have a life partner and not be one of those socially inept man-children who are ubiquitous in the gaming industry, who never married or never even had a relationship. The creator's wife says, "All I ever see is the back of your head." For long days and late nights are spent by her husband slaving away on the box and keyboard, which inevitably puts strains and sacrifices on relationships. It's the same in other entertainment-based professions. We've seen friendships broken, backstabbed, relationships shattered, people thrown under the bus, scripts plagiarized, and pitches containing ideas stolen. And that's all within the formal structures of the film industry. There's also a general animosity and disrespect from those within the industry of how dare you go off and do your own thing, not playing ball with the pre-existing structure. For the established system, like all established systems, expect and require you to conform to the pre-existing system, which contains unhonorable behavior regardless of the larger and higher up within it one gets. Just look at the emails of Columbia Pictures executives leaked online from the seismic Sony cyber attack just before Thanksgiving 2014, followed by 22 days of massive data dumps that exposed embarrassing executive email exchanges and crippled a studio to get a slight glimpse of a preview from that. So now that there is a project in the hopper for Corey, which is his own, he has spent years trying to move it forward on 2 fronts. One is the front of continuing to do it all himself in his own spare time, while the other is getting help from outside sources. We've personally always taken the approach of never relying on outside help to actualize a project, thus only starting one which we know can be finished solo or with a small team of close collaborators. Of course it's wonderful if you get help, but that's the challenge of every filmmaker out there today, including Martin Scorsese, which is how do you get funding for your film? Established industries are not particularly well known for their creativity. Tent poles cost so much to make that studios, of course, want a sure bet, which is understandable because he who has the gold makes the rules, as it should be to some extent. Yet that dynamic results in little to no new leading-edge content being brought into manifestation, but instead, of course, the 4th Spider-Man reboot and the 6th Batman reboot being greenlit. It's almost a miracle something original, spiritual, or philosophical, like let's say The Truman Show or The Matrix, even gets made at all within the system. Corey, having now created intellectual property which is desperately requiring help to complete, has had to go into the trenches a bit within that formal structure to seek some help. Talking to producers, who most likely won't ever return his calls, or if they do return his calls, will flat out reject the project, or if they don't reject the project, they may try and move it forward, and then 5 months into a deal, that may not happen, and things end up falling through. And that happens all the time. Then those months are lost, to never return. So hence one of this writer's philosophies being anything you start, better to always have a contingency to finish on your own. For that's the 100% sure way to actualize a completed result and not have it be lost in the dustbin of history. This is why we do see actual creativity within a cottage industry. An individual or small business making original handmade works. The surfboard maker, the glass blower, the jewelry sculptor, the musician, the game creator, or the independent filmmaker trying to make their own little version of what is more often than not made by large industry. Often requiring slow motion multitasking, meaning shifting between multiple projects or tasks over a series of weeks or months. Ubiquitous amongst real-time lasting creatives actually doing real things. Having multiple hoppers in the fire and finishing them as separate parts or individual pieces that may make up a greater whole. For the mind thinks it could do more and the heart is burning to finish projects, and it's then developing both those and acting on an iron will. For out of thousands of people in industries, only a tiny amount will use their skill sets to create something unique that lasts and is not completely ephemeral. Corey threw an idea at me a couple years back of doing a documentary on this crazy whirlwind Mount Everest climb, which has been absorbing what is now coming up on 2 decades of his life, but didn't have any financial resources at the time to put in anything towards actualizing a documentary about it. So we instead told him we would put together a couple days of writing into talking about it on this here essay. Whatever the status of his project, the name of which may change so we won't even state it here, we have infinite respect for Corey. We respect him more than the top chief within his technical industry, who calls the shots within the hierarchy and may eventually win an Oscar, yet is remaining a technician. Who we don't disrespect, yet we respect Corey more for trying to fly his own creative flag, making a project a somewhat life commitment with zero support structure. Doing all the things he thinks he was supposed to do to make things happen, persevering through times of burnout, pursuing his most creative path, backing his passion, giving his energy, yet still enjoying the process. Regardless if Corey ever summits the mountain peak and returns to base camp in one piece, it will be the journey of the process which is the part that mattered most.